open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
Good afternoon, Kentuckiana. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson, and you're listening to Kentucky's Voice, at least right now, probably on 970 AM WGTX in the Louisville area. I do want to let our listeners know that there are other opportunities to watch the video of this podcast as well as listen to that if that's your preference later on in the day. For example, we have a Facebook live stream that's going now. You can find that at Kentucky's Voice on Facebook. We also have a YouTube channel that does a live stream of this, and that is at the Kentucky's Voice YouTube channel. So either Facebook or on YouTube, just search for Kentucky's Voice. There's usually a live tab, for example, on YouTube that you can get the live stream. Now, that live stream will then be archived right there on YouTube. We will break this down into segments, and we'll also do some short clips that we'll share on various social media, Instagram, Facebook. I think we've got some Twitter video now. There might even be some Twitter video that's on TikTok. So lots of opportunities for you to consume content from this show. I do want to tell our listeners, if you would like to text in a question or a comment, it just usually depends on how jam-packed the show is, and this one is quite jam-packed, whether we can integrate that into the show, but I do guarantee I will read those, and I might even comment on it. If we can't fit it into today's show, I might comment on it next week. So feel free to send in your comments. You can text 502-571-0970 to do that. Let me repeat, 502-571-0970. Now, if you have Spectrum TV as your television provider, we do a rebroadcast of this show daily 3 times at 12:30, 4 p.m., and 7 p.m. That's on Channel 21 WBNA. So just flip over to Channel 21 at 12:30, 4, or 7 p.m. tonight if you have Spectrum TV, and you'll be able to watch a rebroadcast of this show. Now, I do want to warn our listeners, sometimes on your TV guide for Channel 21, Kentucky's Voice will show up at 8 p.m. instead of 7. Try to tune in at 7. I think that's actually when the show goes on. Also, I do want to remind our listeners that we are listener supported. So if you enjoy the content that you're hearing, if you like conservative opinion and talk about news that really relates to Louisville, the collar counties, Kentucky especially, but even U.S. politics will occasionally address, then we could definitely use your financial support. You can provide that support by going to kyvoice.org. That's kyvoice.org, and clicking on the donate button at the top right. That will allow you to either set up a monthly donation or a one-time donation. Every little bit helps if you want to have conservative content. Basically, winning in the marketplace of ideas, which is what the idea behind this program. I also want to tell our listeners we do have a new program on Monday through Friday at this time, 11 to noon Eastern time. So tune in to hear our other hosts and some of their guests. We have a generally riveting content three times a week, and then we do rebroadcasts. Okay. In this first segment, I usually talk a little bit The rumor is that there is a final peace deal between the U.S. and Iran that is in the works and may be signed as soon as this Friday. So I'll reserve comment on that until our Monday show next time to see the details of that, how it compares to the JCPOA. And we can basically have a discussion of whether or not this whole Iran military engagement / war, whether that was a great idea for the United States and whether we came out as the net positive in this. But today we're going to be focused on the topic of marijuana and hemp production in the United States, and in particular in Kentucky, some of the legal challenges and what the future looks like. So join us after the break.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson, with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus as well as the Louisville Tea Party. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice, probably on 970 AM. Again, you can find our content at the Kentucky's Voice channel on either YouTube or on Facebook. I recommend YouTube in particular, where we archive our videos and you can look at our past content. Today, we're going to be discussing marijuana and hemp as industries in Kentucky, some of the legal background on, the industrialization and the commercial sale of hemp and marijuana products, especially in the state of Kentucky, but also nationwide. There's going to be some news that's coming out at the end of this year. If nothing changes in Congress, there will be some significant changes to the federal regulations related to marijuana and to hemp that will drastically alter the industry in Kentucky. So we want to talk about that. We also want to get into some of the dangers of marijuana use, the difference between hemp and marijuana as production. And we also want to talk about maybe what is the future of the industry if some of these legal changes happen, as well as what the current status of Kentucky law is now that we have legalized medicinal marijuana and opened some dispensaries already. But there are still some question marks out there, especially as it relates to what people commonly call weed water or cannabis-infused beverages. Okay, so the two guests that I will have later on in the show are two very good friends of mine, Katie Moyer, as well as Sonia Lake. They will be discussing different aspects of this. By no means am I an expert on either hemp industry or marijuana use. I've actually never used marijuana in my life. And so I wanted to bring on some experts. I will, however, first talk about some of the legal background, just so you understand the context of where we are, and you can then listen to them and get some more expertise and some different perspectives on maybe what the future of marijuana and the future of hemp as an industry in Kentucky are, as well as some of the legal changes that we can expect. Okay, I'll bring those on I'll bring both of those ladies on a little later in the show. So first, let me just talk about some background on hemp versus marijuana. Both hemp and marijuana come from the same plant, the same species of plant called the cannabis sativa plant. The legal difference between hemp and marijuana relates to the amount of THC, which is the psychoactive compound that's contained within both hemp marijuana and in general that whole species of plant, that cannabis sativa plant. Hemp is the low THC version. So this is usually used as products. For example, you can use hemp for rope, clothing, food, CBD oils, building materials, etc. Marijuana is the more high THC variant of this plant. And so over time, as you cross-pollinate plants and kind of try to maximize, either you try to maximize THC or maybe you try to maximize those non-THC uses of the plant kind of differentiates and you get different versions or different variants of the plant that are more useful. The higher THC version and also the higher CBD versions of the plant, those can have some intoxicating or medicinal effects. So we'll talk about those a little later. So what's the background for the regulation of marijuana and hemp in the U.S.? The biggest piece of legislation that has shaped policy in the U.S. as it relates to hemp is the 1970s Controlled Substances Act. That's the short for that is the CSA. The CSA basically defined different tiers of medicinal products or addictive products. And that piece of legislation, it determined that all cannabis products would be classified as Schedule I drugs. That means that they have high abuse potential with no generally accepted medicinal use. So this was in 1970. Marijuana and all products of this sativa plant got classified as Schedule I drugs. That's in the same tier as heroin, for example. So for decades, all cannabis had that category. And what that meant was that cultivation, possession, distribution, even research was basically banned or at least severely limited to some small DEA-approved studies. The biggest change that happened was a little over a decade ago in 2014. In 2014, the Agricultural Act of 2014, also commonly known as the 2014 Farm Bill, instituted a state pilot and research program provision that allowed for the expansion of industrial hemp usage. And they defined that industrial hemp as marijuana or those cannabis plants that had less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC. That's just a technical term. Just there's not a lot of that THC as a chemical within the plant. It required USD and state agricultural department approval, and it basically allowed for the revitalization or the reintroduction of some small level of hemp cultivation after all those decades, those 4 or 5 decades of basically prohibition. The 2018 Farm Bill extended that, and it was actually the most revolutionary in terms of expanding the hemp production business. It removed hemp and derivatives, those low THC versions of the cannabis plant, from the CSA designation that remained for Schedule I marijuana plants. It descheduled compliant hemp. It created USD frameworks for commercial production. The states could offer plans, and there could be direct USDA licensing of hemp products. It allowed interstate commerce of hemp and derivatives, and the FDA still had authority over ingestible or topical products like creams. All right, so that's basically that 2018 Farm Bill is what really expanded the production of hemp. Now, what are some specifics as it relates to Kentucky? And there have been some recent developments in the last couple of years, but we will explore that as we talk with our experts a little later in the show. What's the Kentucky specific situation? Well, in 2023, a bill called SB 47 passed. It began in January of 2025 with the legalization of medicinal cannabis or medical cannabis. In that provision, and that has allowed for the expansion of a limited number of dispensaries, some state-designated cultivators that required that these medical marijuana plants not be grown outside so that they can be pollinated. They have to be indoor greenhouses, etc. Now, the really recent developments in this is that Andy Beshear on June 2nd issued an executive order that required one of the lower level agencies of the executive branch to allow the use of marijuana for 15 more conditions. Initially, when that 2023 law passed, there were 7 or 8 conditions for which a person could get a license, could get a prescription for medicinal marijuana. What Andy Beshear's order did was it added 15 more conditions, things that were basically related to terminal illness, like ALS. By the way, I have a good friend who very recently died with ALS. It's a horrible disease. Parkinson's, sickle cell anemia, Crohn's, fibromyalgia, glaucoma, and a couple of other medical conditions that there have at least been some studies that indicate that there might be some relief through the use of marijuana. The goal was to give seriously ill people, especially people that have issues dealing with pain and who don't want to go into opioids, an alternative by using marijuana for the pain or to deal with some of those symptoms. Now, very recently, House Majority Whip Jason Nemeth from Louisville, he pushed back on this executive order. He basically implied that the executive order itself was not legal, although in the legislation it does allow this particular branch of the executive, this particular agency of the executive branch to make a designation that certain other medical conditions are open to treatment by medical marijuana. The issue was that the governor ordered this agency to allow these things rather than the agency coming to its own conclusion based on its own studies of the scientific research and discussions with the state legislature. All right. Now, the last questions that we got into is the use of recreational marijuana. Recreational marijuana is still illegal in Kentucky and still illegal in the United States. Now, a few states already have legalized medical marijuana. I think we're up to 37 or 38 states that have legalized a form of medicinal marijuana. One way that recreational marijuana, however, has infiltrated the state of Kentucky without real discussion by the state legislation is through a product commonly called weed water or cannabis-infused beverages. And so there was somewhat of a loophole in the 2018 Farm Bill that restricted what types of marijuana, what types of the cannabis plant could be used in products. And so some people took that and used that to create beverages that used those lower THC containing plants but concentrated it into a beverage form. Now, this industry has grown rapidly. I believe it's now in the state of Kentucky, I believe it's over $300 million a year industry just in the state of Kentucky. Now, the state legislature, both in 2025, SB 202, and in 2026, in HB 9 and SB 223, have decided that the way they want to start approaching this is by setting up a taxing regime so that they can tax weed.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson, with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus as well as the Louisville Tea Party. Today on Kentucky's Voice, 970 AM, we are talking about marijuana and hemp as they relate to Kentucky. That includes federal discussions of federal law, discussions of state law, some of the dangers of especially recreational marijuana use, as well as, some of the commercial and industrial benefits of hemp, and talking with some experts on where they see the industry going as we move forward. So later on in the show, I will have on Sonia Lake, who will talk about some of the dangers of marijuana usage. But first, I want to bring on an expert in hemp. So Katie Moyer, who is my next guest, she runs a company called Kentucky Hemp Works. So welcome on, Katie.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right. Now, can you just start by telling our listeners what Kentucky Hemp Works does, how long you've been in the hemp business, and you run a business that's kind of in the southwest of Kentucky, Christian County, Hopkinsville, that area. So just tell me a little bit about that business.
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm the owner, the founder of Kentucky Hemp Works, and we are a family-owned processing facility. What we process is hemp seeds, and we cold press them for oil. The byproduct of that is the seed cake or the protein powder once it's ground into a powder. We also use parts of the plant like the roots. We use those for topical salves that a lot of people get a lot of relief with. We use the stalks of the plant in unique and novel products. And we also do a lot of tinkering. So when we say it's Kentucky Hemp Works, I mean, we're always down there working on something, or more importantly, we're getting raw materials into the hands of people to work on what they make. So we send a lot of bulk raw materials to makers. That could be cosmetics, people making soap and cosmetics and natural goods. That could be people making industrial lubricants. That could be people wanting to use chicken, hemp bedding in their chicken coops. I have been involved in the hemp issue in Kentucky since 2008 when I worked on the first draft of language that would legalize industrial hemp and create a regulatory framework for the state of Kentucky. 5 years and change down the road, we finally passed that bill with the help of a bipartisan coalition of legislators on the federal level, including Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, John Yarmuth, former treasurer for the Democratic Party. Like, it was a very, very bipartisan issue. It was led by James Comer, who was our ag commissioner at the time and who's my congressman out here in the 1st District now. Yeah. Once we legalized hemp in Kentucky in 2013, we turned to the feds. And again, Kentucky had a big part in legalizing that. And I would give Mitch McConnell and Thomas Massie both very equal credit in getting the law passed and changed in 2014 the way that it turned out.
Right. Okay. So many people know that there's been a lot of growth. There's been a lot of growing of cannabis plants in the state of Kentucky for a long time, dating all the way back to the 1800s. I mean, some of the efforts to grow hemp in order to satisfy some needs of wars, actually. So hemp has long been a product that Kentucky has produced. Can you talk about two parts? How has the industry changed really since that 2018 bill? We talked a little about the 2014 bill, but since that 2018 bill, how has the industry changed? And then there's a new federal change that if something big doesn't happen is going to go into effect at the end of 2016. How do you see that future change, and how's that going to relate to the business?
Right. So when the new Farm Bill, I think of it as the new Farm Bill, the original Farm Bill in 2014 allowed state departments of agriculture and universities to grow hemp as part of a pilot program. Now in Kentucky, we did things a little differently than other states. They were very wide open with what we were allowed to do. People started businesses and started exporting out of the state to other companies. And it was, we didn't see a delay in Kentucky. The industry started in 2014 here. Now, in 2018, when that Farm Bill passed, it closed the requirement for it to be part of a pilot program, and it opened it up to essentially everybody. That was the main change
Right.
in the legislation. So it sort of codified everything, and it really gave everybody, the bigger companies, the confidence to jump in the market.
Right.
So when you see big companies that are backed by, groups of investors who have very deep pockets, they can pretty much go jump into whatever new industry they want to. That's when you saw a lot of the marketing change, and things got, we saw this big, like a bubble. We saw a bubble.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people blame farmers for overproduction, which I think is absolutely hysterical, considering that you almost can't overproduce this crop. I mean, obviously, if you give farmers the challenge, they'll try. But, the challenges that we saw in this industry, even though it was an exciting new trend and it was a bit of a bubble, if government had gotten out of the way completely and just let this industry go, and stop trying to not only tighten the reins, but actually, they continue to just completely try to shut down the industry every other year.
Right.
So a lot of us were focused more on just playing defense and keeping our businesses alive than we were on actual marketing.
Right.
Meanwhile, you've got very wealthy people that don't spend a lot of time on policy. They just run businesses, and they're out there just proliferating, as they say, which in this case, I think when you have a novel industry and a new market, especially an agricultural market, I like to see things proliferating. So we saw a giant boom in the market. Obviously, that was choked out by government with the COVID response, shutting down mom and pop stores in Kentucky.
Right.
And so we saw a lot of government mishandling of how that industry really took off. And each of those instances, we fought back, and in most times we were able to keep the industry alive. But it's demoralizing, and it's difficult, and it's
Right.
expensive to fight the government every other year.
Absolutely.
And I can move on to the federal changes, unless there was anything else that I missed on.
No, I think that's good. But even before we get into those federal changes, can you just give us an idea of the scope? Like how much money are we talking about? Both medical marijuana, which is now legal in the state, or the hemp industry more broadly, and really that's a separate industry from medical marijuana. What kind of scale, how much revenue is the state of Kentucky bringing in through this?
Mm-hmm. So you were very accurate in your $300 million estimate. And I think that is not necessarily coming from retail stores and manufacturing completely. There's a lot of farmers in Kentucky that are selling their crops to processors that are all over the country. So we've got a lot of production happening in Kentucky, and we've got some processors that very quietly just do their thing. They're not, you don't see them in the news all the time. They're not tooting their own horn or putting out press releases every other week, but they've just been quietly making profit for farmers here in the boonies in Kentucky, all around the state. And they're building these beautiful little empires, they're, so nationally, the estimates, especially with the new beverages that have been so popular in the last few years, on the national level, some estimates are really getting close to $1 billion. Some people think that $1 billion is a reasonable estimate because there's a lot of value in these economies that maybe isn't captured in a report, like an economic report. So I think we're going to see some more accurate reports coming out in the near future. As far as the market for medical marijuana in Kentucky, I'm not sure yet.
Yeah.
I think that's something, there's a little back and forth. We had maybe a few hiccups in the rollout, and of course, production was slow in the beginning. So I think as production ramps up, we'll really see some more accurate info.
Okay. Join us after the break where we'll continue talking about some of the dangers. This is another side of this, some of the dangers of use of marijuana when we're joined by Sonia Lake.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson of the Kentucky Liberty Caucus and the Louisville Tea Party. You're listening probably on 970 AM. I want to remind our listeners you can see a rebroadcast on television if you have Spectrum on Channel 21. That's WBNA. We do a rebroadcast at 12:30, 4 p.m., and 7 p.m., so you can watch that on your TV. Also, I recommend you go to YouTube or Facebook to our Kentucky's Voice channels, and you can find a live broadcast, archive video, and especially at YouTube, you can find all kinds of short clips as you look at some of our older programming. Okay, we've been discussing the general topic for today's show, which is marijuana and hemp production, the legal challenges and changes in the law, how big the business is, and we'll eventually get into a discussion of where we see the business going. But just imagine, as we just came back from Katie Moyer of Kentucky Hemp Works, she was just discussing how difficult it is when you have a business that really only became legalized federally in 2018. That's industrial hemp production, through the hard efforts of especially Thomas Massie and Mitch McConnell, as well as Rand Paul as one of the biggest advocates. So Kentucky has been right at the forefront of federal hemp regulation. But there are some big changes that are currently slated to go into effect at the end of 2026. We'll discuss some of how those changes and basically making it federally illegal to have products like weed water, which has been a topic of conversation around the state and the state legislature for the last year or two. We'll get into some of those topics. First, I want to bring on my second guest. Her name is Sonia Lake. She has an interesting story about some of the dangers of recreational, especially marijuana, but she'll also have some topics about some of the challenges of medicinal marijuana and some of the dangers to your rights that might come into play if you do decide to get a medical marijuana subscription. I guess it is a subscription, but a prescription is what I really meant to say there. Okay, so Sonia, just tell us a little bit about your story and how it intersects with this topic of cannabis, hemp, marijuana, and just in your own words, kind of what are some of the negative effects that some people have had through their use of marijuana, especially younger in life, as in your case.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Lance, for having me on today. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and everything that you do for our state. The negative experiences that I have had with marijuana in my youth started as early as middle school. I grew up in Bullitt County and was raised in Lebanon Junction and through the Bullitt County school systems, which I love. And recreational marijuana use is popular there in those counties. It is heavily debated that recreational marijuana use is a gateway drug. My stance is that, yes, it is a gateway drug. I have many friends and family members and peers that started using marijuana recreationally that now use hard drugs. I consider harder drugs, even though it's classified as the same still.
Right.
But like methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl. And God only knows if they would have started using those substances without starting with marijuana. However, the truth is they started with marijuana and now they're on to the harder substances. A lot of the studies that we see out here today that look at marijuana as a gateway drug also include alcohol in those studies, and people starting with alcohol, then marijuana, and then on to other substances. However, alcohol is a different type of drug. It is legal versus marijuana is illegal. So I think it takes a different mindset from a person to partake in a legal substance, even underage, versus an illegal substance.
Right. Okay. Now, just like in your experience, when did the use of marijuana turn problematic for you? Like at what age? And what are some of the warning signs if parents kind of know their kids are maybe, what we call smoking weed? They're engaging in marijuana use recreationally. What are some of the warning signs that maybe it's becoming a real problem? and just basically what age do you think is really the transition where that it's really a danger because it's popular in culture and there's no real barrier to continued use and expanding your use at that age?
Yes, the dangers, I believe, start at the very first sign is when it becomes dangerous. The thing about marijuana is it's a sneaky little drug. People don't see it as dangerous. They don't see it as life-altering, and it is. And it takes time to kind of make changes to your brain and to your lifestyle and your view on the world. I would love to say that high school, is the age, but I've seen it as early as, elementary school and middle school. So that is, keep an eye on your children in middle school and during the summertime and high school, those early ages. What made it become a danger, where I kind of realized this is becoming a problem, is when you use a substance of any form as your reliance for peace. You should not look to any sort of substance to provide you that peace in your life. I had a mentor once say to me that using marijuana makes you stop caring about the things that you should care about. And it's very true. You have a stressful day or you face a challenge in your life, and, well, it's easy to go home and have a glass of wine or smoke some marijuana and forget about it. However, we need to have that raw emotion to fuel us to be able to stand up and make changes in our lives.
Right. Okay. Now, there's obviously some big changes that have happened recently. First, Kentucky legalized, the bill passed in 2023, but it really started at the beginning of 2025. Kentucky legalized the medicinal use with a prescription of marijuana for certain conditions. Andy Beshear recently has pushed for the expanding that to 15 more conditions, so increasing the range of medical conditions that you can get a prescription. And also, there is discussion of reclassifying marijuana in general from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3 drug, which means that there are recognized medical conditions that it is useful for treating and that there is not high abuse potential for it. So there will be discussions in Congress about that at the end of this month, just starting at the end of this month, whether or not that's a good idea and whether Congress wants to go along with President Trump's desire to change that to a Schedule 3 drug. So given all of that background, can you basically tell us what are some concerns that you have? Let's just focus on medical marijuana. What are some of the concerns that you have about people that might consider getting a prescription for medical marijuana for one of these various conditions, and especially for people that are young or who have a family history of addiction?
I believe my biggest concern for medical marijuana users, which, let me be clear, medical marijuana can be extremely beneficial. It's beneficial for all of the conditions it is currently legal for and the conditions that are coming into legislation. Now, how that's being brought and dealt with is a completely different story. My biggest concern when it comes to your rights as a citizen of the United States, by being a medical marijuana user, you are forfeiting your Second Amendment right. You are forfeiting your right to bear arms. You are not able to purchase a firearm or to have possession of a firearm if you are a medical marijuana user.
Right.
We do not have that restriction on any other, when you go to the liquor store, you're not forfeiting your right to bear arms.
Right.
If you are prescribed pain medication for a medical condition, you are not forfeiting your right to bear arms. It's very dangerous. Yeah. I do support decriminalization of marijuana, recreational, medicinal. I believe that there's a lot of work to do there. However, picture this. You are a medical marijuana user. You are driving. You get pulled over. The police officer asks if you have marijuana in your possession. You say, yes, sir. Here's my medical marijuana card. You are within, regulations of what you're allowed to carry. And then it comes to fruition that you're also carrying a firearm.
Okay.
That if you lie on that card when you fill out that medical marijuana,
right.
or if you lie when you go to purchase a firearm, that's a felony.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So she emphasized it right there. Do not lie on your application for medical marijuana. That is a felony if it gets discovered. And you are forfeiting your Second Amendment right. If you are using medical marijuana, you cannot carry a firearm. So those are really big barriers, and barriers that may get talked about at the federal level. So let me bring Katie back on. So Katie, I don't know how you obviously are not selling medical marijuana as part of your business right now. Who knows in the future if you want to get into that. But do you have any, I'm sure, however, you know some people that may be using that or have medical conditions that may be treated by that. Have you heard any stories from either customers or maybe business partners, people in the hemp community that have started to or want to get into medical marijuana, about what the possible benefits of medical marijuana would be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got farmers here that have been growing cannabis for the state of Kentucky for over a decade now.
Yep.
And so there is a lot of interest from the hemp industry in participating in the medical marijuana program. Even though there are legal differences between the two and that there's an arbitrary definition that defines that, less than this percent THC is hemp and over that is marijuana. Ultimately, these farmers have been growing cannabis for the state of Kentucky, and they've been doing a very, very, very good job of it for about 12 years now. And we also have stores, mom and pop stores, big stores, I'm talking, corporate chains that have been selling these products as well. And really built out and proved the industry and proved that there is such a high demand that they almost can't get enough of it.
Right.
So what we found is not only is this something that, somebody wants to go and catch a buzz. Sure, that's going to happen. But the vast majority of people who are using these products, whether they're hemp or marijuana, whether they're high THC, are having a huge amount of relief, and they're thriving in their lives. They're getting off of their prescription pharmaceuticals. And I'll say, we talk a lot about children, but I will say that the vast majority of people who purchase my products are elderly, at a minimum boomer. And they are, they're looking to live out the rest of their lives in relative comfort.
Okay. Join us after the break. We'll pick up this conversation.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson. I'm joined by two experts. We're talking about the general topic of cannabis usage in the state of Kentucky, and that includes industrial uses as in hemp. It also includes some recreational uses, which is mostly what's happening with what we call weed water or cannabis-infused beverages. And then we're also discussing topics, the newly legalized medicinal use of marijuana in the state of Kentucky. So let me go ahead and bring back Katie Moyer with Kentucky Hemp Works. As you were saying at the end of our last segment about some of the usefulness of marijuana as a medicinal product, what are some of the testimonials for what benefits there are for the use of medical marijuana? Why is this even something that was considered, much less made into law? What are some of the benefits of that? And then how do you think that expanding the number of conditions, as long as they're legitimate, how do you think that would affect business in terms of the sale of marijuana for medicinal uses?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are just a wide and a growing list of reasons that people use these products and have used these products. And keep in mind, when I'm talking about cannabis, I could be talking about hemp or marijuana, but I'm talking about cannabinoids when I'm talking about the medicinal use typically. But people are using these things for everything from neurological conditions to joint pain, muscle pain, and nerve pain. So a lot of the symptoms that are connected with a lot of the disease in this country cause pain, cause inflammation. And because cannabis is an anti-inflammatory, it affects a lot of that inflammation. And that's part of the reason why I believe it helps so many people with such a wide variety of issues, because a lot of those issues, one of the symptoms is inflammation, or maybe inflammation of the gut, which is causing more symptoms, for et cetera. And one thing that I like to mention is that, you know, although people say, well, there hasn't been enough human studies, or we don't have enough research, we need more research. There have been decades and decades worth of really wonderful studies. And I say studies, I mean government studies, university studies, private studies done from the private sector. And while some of those studies have determined that, yes, this can be a habit forming, especially if you're smoking, that the benefits of it outweigh the risks so greatly that it's almost a non-question.
Right.
One book that I often recommend, which I'll drop it because I think it's good for people to see this, is The Science of Marijuana by Dr. Leslie Iverson. And the reason I like this book is we're talking about a pharmacology or a pharmacologically trained doctor who goes through decades and decades of studies and then sort of breaks them down for common people like myself to be able to understand those studies and not get so bored that I want to throw the book out the window.
Right.
So there's multiple editions of this book, and it has been updated, and it's a very good way to sort of get past the idea that, oh, I'm getting, this person has used THC and therefore they're high. They're hiding from their responsibilities. They're being, immature and lazy. And then actually sort of get past that and look at the fact that, okay, their neurological functions are functioning properly right now. And so they're not in a state of fight or flight mode. And so when somebody says, well, your brain changes, or, these things happen to you and you feel funny, you catch a buzz, or you feel high, however you want to describe that, what that is it's neurological changes in your brain. There's no toxicants. It's not like alcohol, where at some point it's going to reach a toxic level in your bloodstream. I don't like the word intoxicant to use to describe cannabis. Sure, if you want to say that it creates a euphoric effect and you feel happy, that's fine. But I don't really see a problem with people having happiness and fun in their lives, especially if it's helping them to deal with the neurological conditions, the muscular conditions, joint conditions, or especially skin and cancerous conditions that, that are making their lives worse.
Right. Okay.
Now, Now, you asked about expanding the market and how that would change the industry itself. Of course, one of the most conservative things in our political sort of philosophies is that conservatives want a small government and a strong free market. And oddly enough, Andy Bashir is taking the conservative position on this, that we want to see an expansion of this market and more consumers that are able to benefit from the market. And I think that's good or bad. What doesn't matter what party you're in. Typically, it tends to be a more liberal idea that we need to control people in the markets and tell them what to do and make sure that they don't do anything that could potentially hurt somebody.
Right.
And
Okay.
Republicans tend to be more free with the market, but I think we're not seeing that in this case. So it's a little odd.
All right. Now, so just to kind of reiterate what you said, there have been lots of studies that have indicated some help with issues like pain and nausea. The addictive traits of THC and cannabinoids, cannabis products in general, is significantly less than substances like nicotine or opioids like heroin, morphine, fentanyl, all of those type products. So there are some definite advantages. There are some things that have medical benefits. Now, as we think about expanding the number of conditions that might be covered, Sonia, I, like you, probably have some reservations when we're talking about treatment for things like anxiety or psychological issues or self-described problems, that maybe these medicinal marijuana prescriptions can potentially be abused. People just claim that they have various conditions with no objective proof that they actually do have them, and they use them to expand usage. So what are your concerns there when we're starting to move, but past things like objective criterion for diseases, and we get into things like anxiety, for example?
Yes. Marijuana use can be very dangerous neurologically. We've seen in states that have legalized as much as a 30% increase in marijuana-induced psychosis since legalization. So it is very dangerous, and there are a lot of risks that come along with its use. When we talk about anxiety, I am not a doctor, and anxiety is a symptom. Anxiety is a symptom of an underlying issue that is going on in your life. It's a condition. Think of it as a symptom. Medical marijuana use for anxiety is a Band-Aid. It is not going to, and it's a Band-Aid, and it's a coping mechanism, right? It's not going to, it may temporarily relieve that anxiety, but as soon as you stop using it, you're still left with that same anxiety. It's not a cure. And a lot of users of marijuana medically for their anxiety conditions report an increase in anxiety as their tolerance, decreases, as their tolerance builds up and they continue to use it. I believe it's a very slippery slope to allow anxiety to be one of those conditions that we're allowed to use medical marijuana for. Going back to my point in the beginning, you should not be using any type of substance as the form of peace in your life.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's do a little bit of a small transition. What are the future changes that we see coming down the road? As I mentioned in the last segment, at the end of this month, there's going to start to be congressional hearings about rescheduling of marijuana as a drug. Instead of having it as a Schedule I drug, which is the hardest level of drug classification, it basically means the drug has no recognized medical uses and that it's potentially, it has high risk of harm, down to a Schedule III. And I believe President Trump has suggested that he's in favor of it. There's going to be congressional hearings. This seems to be at least part of a path towards general recognition of recreational marijuana. I don't know about Kentucky, whether Kentucky will legalize that. So let me get some feedback from our guests. First, Katie, let's say over the next, 3 years, Do you see a likelihood that marijuana gets rescheduled to a Schedule 3 drug? And do you think that there is a possibility that recreational marijuana might be legalized in the state of Kentucky in particular?
Well, the second question I think is easier.
Yeah,
Robert Steiger
sure.
said that recreational marijuana would never be legalized, and
Okay.
as long as he was Senate president. So I think maybe we'd watch his upcoming races of what he decides to run for, and maybe that'll change. But your first question about the changes and rescheduling to Schedule 3,
Yep.
what one of the main things that changing from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 does is it's the government's admission that it does have benefits medically, and it also opens the market up to FDA approval for their products. So
Right.
we've seen for about 10 years now that these products, Epidiolex, Marinol was earlier, but Epidiolex was one of the first that was made with CBD cannabinoids from hemp. And these products were being developed. It takes roughly 10 years to get a product FDA approved. And I think the timing of the rescheduling, along with the timing of how long we've been making these products in this country, is pretty much the same there. So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of pharmaceutical versions of these products coming out onto the market,
Right.
probably within the next few years. And I think the federal government will go right along with that because as we all know, the federal government's job is to protect billionaires from people like us. So they'll do whatever they can to make sure that the pharmaceutical companies can make their synthetic cannabinoids with their strawberry flavoring that causes liver
Right.
disease. And they'll put that out on the market and they'll put it in every Walgreens, and everybody will know that this pill is exactly the same. Every single capsule is exactly the same. And that's why it's FDA approved, and that's why the government approves it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But what our goal is to do is to carve out a place for real plant medicine for farmers, for Kentucky farmers, processors, and businesses to continue to make products that have variation between plants. Because, like Sonia mentioned, some people get more anxiety from using THC, and those people find wonderful relief from CBD. So I think it's finding the right cannabinoid for each person. That's the trick.
Okay. One last thought, Sonia. What's the last thing you would like people to take away from our discussion today and about marijuana in general?
When it comes to making recreational marijuana legal, I think it's important to consider